everybody? Welcome back to the ATB NFL Live Show. We, of course, did our normal bye week that we tend to do for a multitude of reasons, but it's fine. We'll get through the divisions before the season starts. I promise you that. But we are back with another divisional breakdown, the second to last, so the penultimate division breakdown. Another fun division, really two fun divisions to finish off, which is great. The East is definitely feeding us this year, I think, in terms of content and fun things to talk about with these teams. So we are going to talk about the NFC East first. So obviously, got to save the AFC East for our two AFC East guys here for last. But I do have a little bit of AFC's, things I could talk about next week after yesterday, Tony. I went to the Steelers-Bills game. I apologize for, all of that. But, hey, I'll take it.
Who won? Who won?
Steelers won,
okay.
pretty comfortably.
They were getting that long touchdown revenge after last year.
Yes, yeah, we were taking advantage of that, yeah.
So we literally left yesterday at 6:30 a.m. From Virginia and drove straight through to Florida, got back, and I was able to see the end of the Dolphins game, literally the last fourth part of the fourth quarter. We made incredible time. So I was glad I got to see a little bit of football yesterday.
There you go. But yeah, so talk about the AFC East next week. But moving into the NFC East, we do have a little bit of news to talk about. It's kind of related to our conversation we had last time we were on about the running back market and the whole thing with that. Two veterans who had been sitting on the market for a little while, especially one in particular sitting for a while. Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook both have new teams for 2023. Elliott going to the Patriots on a 1-year, $3 million deal in the most Patriots thing possible, bring in a running back that's pretty much a grinder at this point to probably just take carries away from Ramondre Stevenson for some reason, whatever. But good for him, still kicking around. He's a guy that I thought would be playing into his 30s whenever he was coming out, and maybe he can get there. He's 28 right now, but it's it is what it is. And then the bigger deal, I think for sure, both money wise and impact wise, I think, especially early in the season, Dalvin Cook going to the Jets, joining Aaron Rodgers and that whole shebang that they're doing at this point. 1-year, $7 million deal with incentives if he hits certain rushing marks, which hopefully, if you're a Jets fan, he doesn't hit them because I think it's 1,250 yards and all this other stuff, which would be bad for Breece Hall if he's getting up into that territory. But those two combined should give them a really powerful rushing attack, you hope. Cook can provide stuff in the passing game, of course, as well. We saw the big plays last year, looking at you Colts letting up that touchdown at the end of that game. But whatever. I think that those two are good additions overall. But again, this is kind of the market, right? Even if you're a really talented veteran back like Cook, or if you're a guy that still adds some value to a team but isn't quite the same guy in Ezekiel Elliott, you're getting $3 million, $5 million, $7 million. Not anything particularly great for the running back market still.
Well, regarding our conversation last week, wasn't Dalvin Cook one of the guys that came out and was like, oh, yeah, my contract kind of messed things up. I got paid too much. I need to come back down.
I don't know if I saw him say that, but that, I think there were a couple of deals.
There was someone
a few years ago.
Yeah, there was somebody who was like, "Oh no, I ended up making too much, and I needed to come back down on the scale because it just."
I think that was Aaron Jones who agreed to a pay cut.
Oh, it was Aaron Jones. No, you're right. It was Aaron Jones. Okay, never mind.
He took a
same division. Same division.
Yeah.
But again, market's just it's down, man. It is it is what it is. Especially free agent market, especially running backs are still going to get drafted in the first round occasionally whenever they're good enough and all this stuff, but they're going to do that because they can get away with keeping them on the roster for 5 years without having to really pay them that much money. I mean, even Bijan, he's making good money, ironically, for a running back, even though he's a rookie. But they have him for 5 years. If he's still really great after 5 years, which I think he will be.
Hey, that was a beautiful carry for the money that they got him.
Right, but maybe he gets a second contract. That's nice, whatever. But it's way more valuable to a team to get these guys on the rookie deals and discard them afterwards unless they're special, right? And even the special ones are probably not going to get the amount of money that they deserve / want. That's just kind of what it is. But we'll see what those two do with their new teams. Anything you want to add, Tony, with them?
Yeah, actually. I really came into this thinking I was not going to do any talking at all, but I have some correcting to do. We'll start with the Jets. Mm-hmm. Dalvin Cook is not yet practicing because his shoulder is still injured from last year. Breece Hall is practicing because he is healthy. This is not a sign a guy to get us through the start of the season without Breece. This is a they wanted another running back. They were in on Jahmyr Gibbs in the draft. That's who they were going to take. They have been chasing these running backs, and Dalvin Cook is the guy they wanted. I think they want to go with a little bit of like the dual threat or the dual running back system. I feel like that's what the Shanahan system has always done. That's what LaFleur always did. I know they moved on from one LaFleur and picked up Nate Hackett, who is another LaFleur's disciple. Sorry, right. A lot of LaFleurs here. Yeah. But I think they want to go with the 2 running back thing. The thing is, Dalvin Cook last year, man, I have never seen a running back so afraid of contact. He was like Tyler Lockett playing running back. Anytime there was a defender in the vicinity, he was just falling. That's why he wasn't good last year, because we all saw the explosive plays. He had a ton of them. The explosion is still there. He's still got the juice in his legs. Really he's got all that. If his shoulder is fully repaired and he's not afraid of contact anymore, great signing. Good job, Jets. But his shoulder's still hurt. He's not practicing yet. If he's going to play like that, this is a much worse offensive line. Assuming a much less congruent offensive system. We all know my feelings about Nate Hackett. We're going to get into them deeper next week. But
is it really Nate Hackett or Aaron Rodgers?
Either way, neither of them have called a good offense before in their life. Aaron Rodgers has other things to worry about. He's got bigger fish to fry. Yeah. So I just the Dalvin signing is weird to me, because I think that the way he plays is kind of what Breece Hall should be in this backfield, and they should have been after Ezekiel Elliott as the thunder to the lightning of Breece Hall. Now, over to Zeke Elliott. He's a better player than Dalvin Cook is straight up today. He is elite at pass protection for a running back. He is the best pass protecting running back in the league. That's what coaches want to pay for. He's also really good at just like, in addition to that, like calling out protections. I forget what the exact stat is. I heard this earlier this offseason from somebody justifying Zeke still being good, but he doesn't get tackled behind the line of scrimmage. Like, he's always going forward, and he might get you 3 yards every time you need 2 yards, he's getting you 3 yards. You need 5 yards, he's getting you 3 yards. He's that type of back, but that's reliable. He's goal line, he's reliable. I think what Zeke does is you can only give like 300 touches max to Ramondre Stevenson. There were still another 150 out there that were going to go to Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris.
Yes, Kevin Harris, yeah.
So instead of those guys getting the touches, it's going to be Zeke, who is an objectively much better player than those guys. He's not cutting into Ramondre's workload at all. I am afraid of what the Zeke signing, like, I'm not really afraid of it. We'll get into that next week too. But I think the Zeke signing is a very good move for the Patriots, a very necessary move for the Patriots, a very smart move for the Patriots. I think the Dalvin signing for the Jets was kind of weird and doesn't really accomplish what they were hoping to accomplish with it. I think they should still just be throwing money at offensive line. Like, get Dalton Reisner out there. He's still a free agent. Yeah. That's a better use of that money than Dalvin Cook is to this roster.
I wonder with Reisner. Have Ty Montgomery. Interesting.
Yeah,
he doesn't count. I forgot about him.
He's just a guy that's out there that does whatever.
Is he officially a wide receiver or running back?
It's running back. I don't know. He's ahead of Pierre.
He's a running back, I guess, but whatever. He's just whatever he is at the time. That's pretty much what I thought with Ty Montgomery. But I will say, like with Reisner, because you brought him up, I'm wondering if he just maybe doesn't want to play football, because there's no way teams haven't been like, hey, listen, you are better than who we have. How much money would you like to come play for me? And I think he's said no, because I just wonder if maybe he doesn't want to play. But I am curious to see if he does.
I can think of 2 teams in the NFC East that could make a call right now.
That's kind of the whole thing. That's why I wonder, like, why is that not happening? But anyway, with Zeke, I do think it's interesting because he is still a valuable player, like you said, Tony, but for not a lot of the same reasons that people associate with Zeke, right? So, like, I think that's part of the problem with him in the narrative is, like, it's not so much that he isn't an effective player anymore. It's that he's not effective in the ways that we knew him to be, right? He isn't this explosive runner anymore. He isn't the guy that's going to carry your backfield. He's not any of that stuff anymore. That's fine. But if he doesn't have to play that role and he can be the second running back to Ramondre Stevenson, he does still definitely provide value. And I think his value is more – it's easier to see his value in the Patriots offense than it is Cook in the Jets offense, like you said, because, one, you hope Breece Hall can be the lead guy. And if he is, then if Cook's only going to get, 5, 6, 7 carries, unless they're explosive plays, if his shoulder, like you said, doesn't hold up or he's not comfortable with contact, he's probably going to be ineffective more often than he's effective at this point, right? it's going to be interesting to see what he looks like. If he can bring some more power back to his game and break tackles again more, then I think he's at least it's a really great duo, right? But we haven't seen that in a year, right? So like you want to see that happen. We'll see how he looks whenever he starts practicing and whenever the games start, but it'll be interesting to see if these two make a huge impact. I think, like you said, Elliott is more likely to provide some impact of some kind, even if it's not anything crazy. Whereas Cook has the upside potential, but you wonder if he can keep it going for the whole year. But let's move into the NFC East breakdown. We're going to start, of course, with Washington, finished last in the division last year. Still, this is a team, and I'll say this kind of right off the bat, this division is pretty strong across the board. I don't think any of these teams are truly bad in any way. I think that they definitely, especially Washington, obviously, and the Giants and things like that, because their rosters are still kind of being built up. They have some holes, they have some question marks, but they're not one of these teams that I don't think any of these guys are competing for a top 5 pick. Let me put it that way. No. I'd be very surprised, just because Washington has a pretty sizable, pretty decent floor, just because they have a veteran coach who has taken worse rosters than this to at least not being in the top 5 picks. They do have a new quarterback, essentially, that we'll talk about. That should be interesting to kind of have that conversation with the rest of the quarterbacks in this division. But overall, I think this team has a pretty sizable floor there, and the ceiling, though, is what I think about with this team.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that brought the floor up is they have a brand new offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
There has been some drama with that, though.
There has, but I think
it's interesting.
I think that's a big culture thing over the past 10, 15 years of Washington and them think of who's been in there. There hasn't been the creme de la creme of offensive coaching.
Oh my God. So Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur.
Okay, but they left and went on to do it better at other places because they had the backing of a team that would actually build around them. That's what I'm saying. That's the problem. There is, what have you had in Washington for the past 10 to 15 years? Nothing.
Yeah, I think they've had some good coaches over the years.
They've had some good coaches. No, but I mean player-wise, personnel. You haven't had the personnel to actually put forth anything that they wanted to do.
I mean, they did have a left tackle that was really good until they told him he doesn't have cancer in his head, and then he did.
So. One left tackle, but it takes.
I'm just
RG3, Santana Moss, Pierre Garcon. There were some fun years in there.
There were
I understand, but it was. You have to understand.
They never put it all together.
They never put it all together. It was the mismanagement. Right. It was all of that because RG3 could have been amazing, but there was no reason for him to ever go back on that field after the Ravens game when he injured his knee the first time that season. He should never have gone back out. But they had been trying to get the ghost off their back for so long that it was like, no, we'll be fine. Who cares? And then he did it again, and it was done. I mean, they've had so many opportunities, and this year, finally getting the Daniel Snyder curse off of the backs is probably, in the end, what's going to mean the most for this franchise for the next 5-10 years in the future. Yeah.
I definitely think that the vibes are going to improve significantly immediately now that guy's out of there. I don't like so. You mentioned before the show they're regaining sponsors that they lost during the Snyder years, and that's super exciting. It's very clear that there's opportunity for massive improvement with the franchise. Nothing has changed on the football field yet. Ron Rivera is still the head coach, and I think for us to see the impact of this new ownership group on the field, there needs to be a change at head coach for this team to really go on and do anything. So I don't know if I think that's going to matter a lot to the next 5 years of this franchise, 5 to 10 years of this franchise. I don't know how much it can do year one because it's still Ron Rivera out there running the show his way, and I don't think that way really works in the NFL anymore.
Oh no, I 100% agree with you there. And that's where that's the other reason why I think the Bieniemy news is coming out is because look, Ron Rivera was a fantastic coach in the NFL. But this team has been mitting hard the past couple years, and there needs to be more of a fire lit under some of these players to come out and play immediately and be ready immediately, as opposed to the potential of this team has been pretty high the past couple years, and it's been week 7, 8, 9 before you start seeing any sort of like, is Washington coming? Are they going to make this an interesting season? Are they going to try to push for it? And no, I 100% agree with you there, because like Ron Rivera is starting to become one of the weaker links of this team.
Yeah, I think the main thing for Washington right now for me, and well, I'll talk about them as an overall like franchise for a second, then I'll talk about them for this year. But their real Achilles heel for a while has been, like you said, the inability to put it all together. They've had very talented coaches in here. They've had talented quarterbacks. Rob Griffin III, to go back to 2012. Obviously, what happened with him and his knee. They have Kirk Cousins in the building for several years, and as much as we like to joke around with Kirk Cousins sometimes, was a very good player for them. And the fact that they chose to go the route they did with him and the multiple franchise tags and all that stuff, like, I understand not wanting to commit to a guy if you don't think he's truly the one to take you all the way.
He's like one of the only people to get the multiple franchise tags.
Exactly. Yeah, listen, he's the ultimate bag getter in the NFL, Kirk Cousins. But that we've talked about that. But I think the thing with that, like when they made the decision that they were going to play games with him and not sign him to a long-term deal, maybe if they do that, does it mean that they're all of a sudden way more successful than they are right now? Maybe not. Maybe it doesn't ultimately mean anything for championships or anything like that. But because they made that decision, they've gone through multiple quarterbacks for the past 5 years, especially, and they hope that maybe Sam Howell can be a fifth-round gem. I did like him, especially that late. I think that he can be a good player. But they're probably at best going to get a similar situation where they don't know if they can commit to this guy, right? And if that happens, are they just going to keep doing that route? And that's what they've been doing for years now. What I'm hoping for this team this year is that the defense comes into its own, right? With all this young talent on the defensive line, they hope that the linebackers like Jamin Davis, like he's very talented. He kind of came on a little bit more last year. He was very rough as rookie, but if he can step up to the plate, this corner room is interesting. We'll just say that. Have a couple players that I'm interested in, but this defense has to be the thing that is the catalyst of this team, because the offense is going to be run by a second-year quarterback who's a fifth-round pick. We just talked about him, Sam Howell. The running back group is deep, but not super exciting to me. Like I like those, like especially the top two guys, but I don't think they're going to be anything special.
Ooh, I don't know. I think after last season, you give Brian Robinson Jr. the full one, and Antonio Gibson was fantastic in his transition last year, and I'm excited to see what else he does, because he was on the verge of not being on the team a season ago, because like they were like, oh no, well we have JD McKissick, why would we pay you, Antonio Gibson? Show us that you're more than just a runner. And he was like, all right, bet, I got you guys, and completely transformed his game and showed that he was much more than just like, hey, I'm going to be the explosive guy to the backfield. No, he was like, hey, give me passes. I will turn all that stuff, and now has become, I mean, unfortunately, I love JD McKissick. He was fantastic. He won me a fantasy championship. So
I think he did it for that.
Goated running back. But he completely showed last season that he was able to take over for that role, and they cut ties there. I'm really excited to see what they can do, because Brian Robinson Jr. also was fantastic last season in the time that he was able to play. Like he was rolling.
I do think it'll be interesting to see how much an offseason helps him, because like he did, he started out not the best, which is understandable after getting shot in the leg twice. But he did pick up steam towards the end of the season, so they may have found a gem there. I'm not as high on Antonio Gibson. I think that last year was his best year by far. I don't know how much more there is there, but I'm really excited about Brian Robinson Jr. And I do think Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky was a great late round draft pick. Sorry, words are hard today. But he's just another bruiser type. So I like that they got 3 different skill sets in there. I think Brian Robinson can take on some more pass work. I don't know how much you want to cut into Gibson's role with that, but
but I think
they have some fun versatility in the room.
They were trying to use him wrong, and I think that was the big thing. Is they originally had Gibson slotted as being the Brian Robinson of this offense, and then realized, oh wait, no, we need to use him as the passing back, and then. That they had Brian Robinson slated to start the start of last season. But then he got shot.
Well, Gibson especially, like he was a hybrid player at Memphis, right? Like, this is what he did, and the fact that they didn't immediately use him that way was always a little bit interesting to me. But I do think he's definitely he's a better fit as a number 2 running back that also is the main pass receiver. I think Brian Robinson gives you a very high floor at running back. And I think that's really important for a team that needs stability on offense, because of the fact that he is very solid in pretty much every aspect of the game. I don't think he's spectacular, and I think that's part of why like he was definitely billed as like a mid-round. Like, you need a running back to do everything a running back needs to do. He can do it, but is he going to do it more than above, like slightly above average? I'm hoping
I know a
he
different
can be
Alabama
really
running
good.
back who you could describe that with that went in the first round.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we'll yeah.
I'm sorry, they hurt me yesterday. I had to get a shot
Yeah,
in.
it's fair. Yeah, Jalen Warren though.
He's
Jalen
nice.
Warren. Yeah. Now, granted, I wish that they would block for Najee like they blocked for Jalen on that play, but that's a whole other conversation. We'll get to, and I'll talk about that, I'm sure, a lot this season. But no, I think that this team is really the ceiling from this team comes to me from the defense and from how well Sam Howell can play, right? Because they have weapons on this team. We just talked about the running back.
Oh,
I love the starting receiving trio.
the
And
receiver room is
Jaime Brown is
fantastic.
your fourth receiver, by the way. I want that man to be a full-time starter on someone else's team at some point, or like maybe Curtis Samuel or something has to go somewhere else. But like their receiving core, if Samuel stays healthy, especially, which has been a problem, but we know if Dotson can have a full season, if those three can play most of the year together, this passing game is a very, very, very high floor.
They've had quite a few.
Great.
They've had quite a few misses, but finally hitting on Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin is absolutely what Washington deserved after many failed wide receiver ventures.
Can I offer you a Josh Doxson?
Hey, the smart teams keep swinging. It's the same reason the Eagles recovered from taking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to keep swinging. Yeah.
And then what's his name? Curtis Samuel. That was an incredible find, anyways, because he was with the Panthers.
Yes.
Yeah, he was with the Panthers, and
just in depth chart.
He has a ceiling that nobody's been able to find. And
I
know it's out there. Though.
I know it is. We know that. That's the thing about him. Like when he just needs to play a whole freaking season.
And this is why I have very high hopes for Washington this year, because in reality, it's Washington's whatever to lose, but this is Eric Bieniemy's chance to lose. This is his opportunity to be like, hey, no, it wasn't only Andy Reid, it was me too. Like I had a hand in there, and he has the opportunity here to just walk in and be like, hey, we can do this. We have some dudes. Sam Howell doesn't have to work that hard. I'm not asking him to be Patrick Mahomes. I'm just asking him to run some of the same plays.
I think the best outcome for Washington this season, we'll talk more about some of the guys in the roster because I definitely want to talk about some of them, but I think the best combination of outcomes for the Commanders this year, which, by the way, I wonder what name they're going to choose, because it sounds like they're going to change the name again, right, from what I've heard.
Really?
So that's what I was hearing, at least, that they're going to. We'll see what happens with that. But I think the best thing that they can do is have a good enough season offensively for Bieniemy to be the guy, but Rivera to lose his job and Jack Del Rio to lose his job. They both got to get out of here. Bieniemy becomes the head coach of this team after providing a really good offensive spark with a young quarterback, and they fill out the coaching staff with guys on defense who could try to get the most out of this front, especially front seven. That, I think, is the best outcome for this team, because if they do overperform, right, does that buy Rivera a little bit of more time? And I don't think it. I hope that it wouldn't, because I think that this new ownership should understand, like, this has kind of run its course. They just didn't want to make a change right away when they first got in here, because it just got here. But I like to think that they know at this point that this has kind of run its course as far as its potential. So even if they do have like a 9-8, 10-7 type season, if they do overperform, I'm hoping that doesn't mean that we get another year of this setup, because I like you said, Tony, I think that we've very much reached the point where we don't have to do this with Ron Rivera. Like, we need to get someone now, whether it's Bieniemy getting promoted or whatever may happen. It's just, I think that that's the biggest thing that needs to happen, is this team needs to show the talent that it has, but also not be so good that they stick around with everybody else, right? Like that they keep all their guys. That's kind of, I think, the sweet spot for them. What do you guys agree with me there? You think that's kind of the best thing for them?
I guess, I mean, the Jack Del Rio thing is just like getting egregious at this point.
I don't like really see him.
Yeah. But I mean, the problem is going to be, like you said, if Bieniemy comes in and gives a spark and they do any sort of amount better, Unfortunately, it all goes uphill, and they're not going to necessarily attribute it to just Bieniemy. It's going to be like, oh, well, I mean, why would we get rid of Rivera? Now, hopefully, if the defense is bad enough, they're like, okay, yeah, we need to make that change. That can still happen, but I don't know if this team is better if that means that they'll get rid of Rivera. That just doesn't necessarily scream Washington to me. Now, granted, brand new ownership, so hopefully they're not as dumb as the old ownership, but I don't know.
I'm pretty confident that no matter what happens this year, they're not going to retain Ron Rivera.
That's kind of
does his contract end?
No, but I don't think there's ever really. I don't think there's ever been an ownership change that wasn't followed by a head coach change in the following year. It's always either that year or the next. They want their own guys. They have no reason to. They're not the people who hired Ron Rivera, right? They're just coming in as owners and they're just evaluating their employees and they're like, this guy isn't as good as the rest of the field. Unless they win the Super Bowl, I just don't see any path to him remaining with them.
It's going to have to be something. He's going to have to show them something. And us.
I mean, if they win the NFC East, if they win the NFC East, I could definitely see them retaining him.
That's what I'm saying.
I need context there because if they win the NFC East while all the other teams are healthy, it means they won 15 games. If they win the NFC East because Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott go down, I'm not going to give Ron Rivera another year.
Right. There's context there. But basically, he's going to have to show something that he hasn't shown as a coach in quite some time. And I think
he needs to go 15-1 and lose the Super Bowl. We're winning.
Basically.
We'll see how they do this week. If they end the Baltimore Ravens 24-game preseason win
streak, which is
streak.
Such a funny thing, by the way. I think
hang the banner now if they do it.
It's literally the funniest record, and it's so fun.
Yeah.
It's so improbable. It's absurd.
It just doesn't make. It's just not something that makes sense.
It's John Harbaugh's insatiable energy for you know what? I might not be able to win them all in the regular season, but we're gonna try in the preseason.
God damn it! I'm gonna win every preseason game. No, I mean it helps whenever you go 3 deep at every position on purpose, just because it's funny. But whatever.
Yeah, just to tie a bow on that, best case scenario for the team this season, I don't think about the coaches at all when I think about the best case scenario. The best thing that can happen to the Washington Commanders this season is that their quarterback looks like he can start for his entire rookie deal, because that makes everything else okay. It doesn't matter who your coach is. It just does not matter.
He has not looked bad in his first action.
They'll just go hire Bobby Johnson next year. Who's the guy in Detroit? Bobby Johnson is an old O-line coach of the Bills.
Oh, Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson, there it is. All right, yeah, go hire Ben Johnson and Sam Howell 5th round salary cooking with gas. That is best case scenario. It doesn't matter who the coach is. Sam Howell just needs to look good.
Again, I think Howell is the thing with him is that I know 2 things about Sam Howell at this point. I know that he is a running threat at quarterback, which is always nice to have, and I know homie can drop bombs. That's about it. Everything else, we'll have to see if it works out. But I know he can throw the deep ball, and I know he can run around like.
So here's the other thing. I'm totally willing for him to have a spotlight as opposed to Mitch Trubisky, because you have
no one even talk to me about Mitch.
No. Talk about. Listen to me. You have no idea how frustrated I was when I was sitting there that draft, and I was like, why? Why is Mitch Trubisky getting drafted this high? This makes 0 sense. I watched this guy get fried by Virginia Tech 3 times every year, just get completely destroyed by our defense. And I'm like, this makes 0 sense. Oh, come on now. And now Sam Howell's come around. He didn't do too bad, but I'm like, all right, 5th round, that's respectable. This is a bad Virginia Tech team. You've kind of beat us a little bit. All right, fine. Take your spot. So I'm like, all right, cool. Do your thing, man. You can do this.
I had him as a 2nd round player in that draft. So I think that the value was really good, and I think he has enough tools. I think that's the key thing with him is he's not a 5th round pick. He wasn't a 5th round pick because he doesn't have NFL starter tools. It's that I think his offense was so weird compared to the year before.
He spent years with Phil Longo, and that's really hard to overcome immediately.
Exactly. It was a weird team and a weird offense. He was the number 1 rushing threat at quarterback in the country that year for whatever reason. And if he can figure it out, if he can be, like you said, Tony, a at least average starter on a rookie contract, it's just going to be really nice, especially a 5th round rookie contract. That just doesn't happen.
You're paying that guy like $850,000.
Exactly. You could argue like with San Francisco, but they don't count because they have voodoo magic. So I don't.
I was going to say,
that's Mr. Irrelevant.
If we're living in a world where Brock Purdy is like the apple of Kyle Shanahan's eye and a starting quarterback in the NFL, then Sam Howell has a place here.
Yes,
because he's just like 110% Brock Purdy.
He's objectively more talented.
I know we already talked about the NFC West, but can we acknowledge how much more annoyingly complicated they have made that this preseason, that quarterback battle, with how they've decided to start people? And I'm just like, yo, what are you doing right now?
I'm pretty sure that they think Trey Lance is like an XFL quarterback at this point.
Yeah, they're like, oh no, yeah, you can have him. You want to do a trade? We'll trade you for someone.
I don't know, man. I feel bad for Trey. Like, he hasn't played football at all for like years. It feels like just doesn't.
And they're just like, no, you don't deserve to. Get out of here. Banishment.
All right.
Let's not
gotta reel us back in here.
Yes.
Sorry. We just it came up, and I was just like it's just been so aggravating to watch it from week to week.
So, I have something that I've been wanting, and this is for me. The defense is going to be really good. Yeah, the defensive front is going to be really good. Yeah, Sam Howell, I have high hopes for. The running back room, I have high hopes for. The receiver room, I think, is insane. And Eric Bieniemy might be a really good offensive coordinator. Let's hope.
Hopefully.
Andrew Wiley and Charles Delano Jr. are your tackles. You've got Sadiq Charles playing left guard. What the hell are you doing with this offensive line? This is dreadful. They're not. So you guys expect them to be a little bit better than I do, and I have a blind spot for them. I'm probably lower on them than I should be, but this offensive line is dreadful, and it's a 5th round quarterback. Even though I like him, it's a 5th round quarterback behind a terrible offensive line and a new offensive coordinator, a new system that they all have to learn. I think the offensive line is the worst unit on this team. I think it's one of the worst units in the league.
It's going to be, I think if there's anything that's going to be a limiting factor for this team in this year, it's probably them, because again, they're building a whole new offensive system around Sam Howell and with Bieniemy, and to do that with a bad offensive line, something I know a lot about, unfortunately, and hopefully not this year, but it's just hard if they can't at least be not in the way of things, because like when you look at offensive lines across the league, we know offensive line play is bad in the NFL at this point. Like the depth especially is awful. Most teams don't have 2 guys you want to see play besides their starters, and some teams don't have 4 starters that you like to see. Like that's just kind of how it is right now.
We'll get into that next week.
They're kind of in that territory of like, do you have more than 2 or 3 guys who you're like, yeah, I'm okay with them being starters on my team? Not really. And I think if you're in that tier of offensive line, you're bordering on like, is this going to prevent us from doing what we want to do? Because there's lines who are the reason you can do what you want to do, that help you do what you want to do, that allow you to do what you want to do, and then you're getting into they might keep us from doing what we do. Like that's firmly where they're at, the territory, right?
So
and it's going to be something that like if they can't get this unit to gel together and play well enough, it might not, like I said, it might not matter how good the receivers are. It might not matter if Sam Hall's actually good or not. Like Bieniemy can only do so much if his line can't block anybody, and it's going to be hard to know how good those guys are if the line really is as bad as it possibly could be.
So I think that's why it's important to point out that we haven't mentioned one position on the offense, and I think that's because they've completely gone blocking with this position. That's tight end.
Oh my God, I forgot to talk about tight end.
Yeah, Logan Thomas.
And that's where like Logan Thomas was an offensive presence at one point, a weapon for them to use. He's gotten up there in age. And Virginia Tech, yes. However, look, the man was a human, just like fall over and get 3 yards. We're getting a first down. But he has that knowledge of the offense and what they need to do. They're relying on him now for his blocking and that sort of aspect from him, as opposed to being an offensive weapon. And that's where you look down the line behind him, and it's like, oh, John Bates, Cole Turner, Curtis Hodges.
Turner's the only one that like has a little bit of receiving upside, I think.
Yes, they have gone all in on blocking at the tight end. So like, not that it means much, but as long as it must mean that they're planning on running some 6-man sets for blocking specifically from that end. Not that it makes up for the lapse in not having some of those other positions, but it is an added boost as well to have that veteran presence there, and hopefully can be like, hey, Like, let me help some of these guys up and talk some of these guys up. It's not like strong as hell, but it's like an added boost.
That is a really good call out. We saw Kansas City use a ton of 12 and 13 personnel last year, and it seems like they're gearing up to do the same. So that will help a lot of blocking woes. I still think the offensive line is just not enough.
It's still a problem.
But that's that's a really good call out about something that will help their protection and an offensive coordinator who knows how to use it to help their protection.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. One last thing I want to say about the roster, at least, is that I agree with the decision based off of where the team is at to just roll with Sam Howell, and because if you find out that he's startable, then you have struck gold, and that is worth everything. Jacoby Brissett is a top. I didn't do the list beforehand, so I don't want to say top 20. I'm going to say top 25, I feel like I might be able to say top 20. I might be able to say top 20 quarterback in this league. He is a damn good football player based off of what he showed in Cleveland last year, and I think that if this team were focused on winning games this year, Jacoby Brissett would be the starter.
Yes, I do agree with that because, again, Sam Howell's just an unknown. He's played one game in the NFL, looked pretty good.
It's the right decision.
I think that's why possibly ownership has not given up on coaching because they're going to say, hey, if you believe in this kid, you got the only people that have seen him are you. So we'll give you one season. If he can pull it all together and he can start, good on you. If not, we'll pull the plug at some point. And that could be the pull the plug is if they start and it's week 6, 7, and this team is 1-5, 1-6.
Rivera's certainly a mid-season firing candidate.
Then they could pull that plug and be like, hey, no, throw Brissett in there. Sam Howell's benched. Ownership's taken over. We're gonna put our guy in at the start of the next season. Brissett's taken over. I could absolutely see that being the case.
I think especially like the conversation with Brissett is really interesting to me because like he was excellent for Cleveland last year. And I feel like with him is you said about like could he be top 20? I think if you exclude rookies because we don't know anything about them, he's certainly up there at that point. I think top 25 is pretty safe because there's just not a lot of guys who are both backups but also have enough starting experience to have a baseline of understanding about them. Like a lot of the guys who you would want to put over him that are currently starters just haven't shown enough yet to really be above him because he is a veteran player as well as got a lot of experience. So I think you're right on the money with that, Tony. I think that this is a guy like obviously if Howell's just terrible or if he gets hurt, of course, or whatever, like he can come in and win some games for this team, especially if the offense is like allowing him to not get killed, right?
A fourth place NFC East or an NFC team, absolutely. You can take that schedule.
Yeah, exactly. So but last thing I want to mention with this team is secondary. I'm really curious to see how Emmanuel Forbes does in his first season, especially the rookie first-round pick. He was a really polarizing player for me when I was going through, and we talked about it a lot with him. Is I just wonder if he can do what he was doing in college at the NFL level with his size profile. Like that's kind of the question I have with him most. Like his tape, very fun. He's an explosive player, athlete. I'm curious, and I haven't seen him. I don't know if he's played much in the preseason. I haven't watched Washington much at all, but I don't know if he's going to be that guy for them. That's kind of my question, especially as a rookie. It's going to be really hard as a rookie, especially.
Yeah.
That's where I think it's important that this defense has a lot of established pieces across the board that they could afford to be like, all right, kid, go out there, do your best.
I think he was your guy at corner, and he was not my guy at corner. I think when we were doing our drafts stuff, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm still scared of his size.
It's a concern.
I do think that like for this year they need chaos, which he is. Chaos,
and he's going to play he's going to play off coverage a lot in the scheme, a lot of zone. So like I think that going to this scheme is going to help him be more effective in year one, and really beyond that, unless they bring in a coordinator who does want him to come up and play bump and run and stuff like that. But again, the ball skills will translate, I assume. I'm not really worried about that. I think that receivers are going to be able to bully him down the field. I just don't know if he's going to be able to hang with guys up in the air, be able to do a lot of that if they get their body in him. Like if he's coming over to make a play or if he's, using his speed to make up distance and battle ball, like that's fine. But in these contested catching situations, especially if he gets into those, he's probably just going to lose them a lot of the time against bigger receivers. Like, and you live with that if he makes plays and all that stuff. But like, it is something to keep in mind. But before we move on, let's move on to the next team here in a second. But I want to give a quick record prediction. What do you guys think for Washington this year? I know we'll start with Tony because I know he's probably maybe slightly lower, as he said, on him than us.
Yeah, I'm going with like a ceiling of 9. I think I was going to say 8, but though you guys have brought up some good points that I didn't really think of. That so like I do think that they can get slightly above 500. I don't think the ceiling's anything above that. Right. I think their floor is pretty low. I think it could be as low as 4 wins if things really don't work out. And then I think they're going to go 7-10. It feels like I looking at their record from last year, I'm shocked that it was as good as it was. Like I said, I know I have a blind spot for the team, but I do think that they're going to win 7 games this year is my true prediction.
What do you think, Zach?
Yeah. As a near DC resident, I will say that NFC East divisional battles are absolutely insane.
You think?
So they're like there's no predicting because like even last year, I'm pretty sure Washington ended Philadelphia's undefeated campaign.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they were the first ones to show
with
off the rushing.
with the Heineke weird slide at the end that got a penalty. It was very funny.
Yeah. I look. This is a weird division. I have some concerns about really only one other team as opposed. But I think that if all the pieces come together, I feel this team could compete with Dallas for second in the division. I'm not at the point where I'm sitting here and I'm saying like, oh yeah, no, they're going to go up and be with Philadelphia. But I could see them getting to maybe 10-11 if things bounce the right way. And they get the better bounce in the divisional games. That's going to be the key for them is if they can win more divisional games than they lose. That's going to be right there. But yeah, the floor though, it could fall apart very bad. And I agree with you, Tony. The 4 win, the 3, 4, 5, that area that could absolutely happen. But at this point, like a 9-8. I don't think they're going to have a losing record. I don't think any team in this division is going to have a losing record. So if I have to put anything, I'm going to say 9-8.
Okay, so I'll just start. This division is the cream of the crop in the NFC, right? I think if we're going to see a division that is across the board pretty at least average or better, this is it, right? And I think for Washington, I'm going to say they could, if Sam Howell is who they hope he is, if the offensive line, similarly to the Raiders last year, looks bad on paper but plays above what you expect from them, and the defense doesn't play only like 6 good games like they have the past year, they could win 10 games. I don't think they will, but they could. I think it's possible in an NFC, even with their division. But like you said, Tony, like you said, Zach, I think that this team, if they bottom out, if Howell's bad and they let him play it out because he's a young player and they want to see what he can do and just kind of lets him play out the string. If the defense doesn't have, a strong start or just doesn't play well for most of the year like they haven't, they could lose, 10, 11, 12 games pretty easily. And then even more than that, if, again, Howell's bad enough that they need to, especially if they go away from him at some point, if the team is that bad. I will say I think they're an 8-9 team. I think they're on the fringe of the playoff contention. I don't think that they're going to win more than 9 games, especially unless something, like I said, really goes well for them and gets them up to that 10 range. But this is a solid football team. Is basically, I think it's the best way you can describe them. Is they have really strong talent in a lot of important areas, but they still have some things to sort out, especially in the coaching staff, where there's just a lot of either question marks or kind of where we know that these coaches are where they are, like they are what they are at this point. So, but let's move into the Giants next, the surprise team of the NFC last year.
It wasn't a surprise. They got competent coaching.
I was still surprised that they were able to turn that roster into a team that made the playoffs, because I knew the coaching was obviously going to be a huge upgrade. We know Tony, you know plenty about Brian Dable. I wasn't concerned about the coaching at all. I was concerned about if this roster was even remotely in a position to make good on the coaching hire in year one. I expected Dable to come in and build a scheme and build the culture up and, lean on Barkley, which they did. But I didn't think they were going to be able to win enough games to make the playoffs. Like, I don't know if anybody really was expecting that at least. Maybe they were hoping.
As opposed to Washington, who had some of those legendary coordinators who have now turned into prolific head coaches come through. When was the last time we saw something decent come out of the Giants?
Well, that's kind of my point. Is like I don't think anybody last year was expecting them to be as successful on the field as they were. In terms of winning.
But I guess I'm saying more so with that hire of Brian Daboll and somebody who actually knows how to like run something somewhat competently. Like we were watching some of the like stupidest stuff happening in New York for like the past like 5-6
Jason Garrett,
years.
Maybe.
Well, not even Jason Garrett. Like that was somewhat of a return to something decent. I mean, like think of some of the stuff before that, like the press conferences that we were having from I can't even think of their names anymore.
Judge one. What's his face? I can't think of his name right now.
They had a bunch of goofy
Gettleman, the GM.
Well, Gettleman's the whole thing. That man loves his D tackles. I guess it kind of worked out in the case of Lawrence, but yeah. Yeah, again, like my whole thing with the Giants again is that I didn't expect them to do what they did, and I think that they are going to be able to build upon that. And
it's really from post Coughlin, Ben McAdoo, Steve Spagnuolo, Pat Shurmur, and Joe Judge.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
it's been a rough time.
Yeah, but again, like I think our expectation going into the year for them was okay. They have a real head coach who's an offensive mind, who should be able to build the culture in this team and get them where they need to go. But doing so in year one and then winning a playoff game, granted against the fraudulent, and I'm going to say it again, fraudulent Minnesota Vikings. Despite that being the case, they still won a playoff game in the first year of regime coming from a team that just wasn't even remotely competitive for most of the year prior. And they didn't change a lot with the roster because they couldn't. They were literally just trying to
they had
shed salary.
Dead cap.
Like they were shedding salary. The rookies didn't even play all that great overall. Like Neal was a problem at tackle a lot of the year. Thibodeau didn't play as much as he could have because of injuries. Like there wasn't even like spectacular rookie class came in and completely changed the dynamic. Daniel Jones just played like a competent NFL quarterback. Saquon Barkley was a freak. The coaching was awesome. I mean, their best receiver at the end of last year was Isaiah Hodgins. Now I like Isaiah
going to be their wide receiver one this year.
Probably, yeah. At least to start the year, it's just for them.
Darren Waller will be their wide receiver one.
Yeah,
Jalen Hyatt's
semantics.
One.
Oh, jeez, yeah. But my point being, before we talk about this team for 2023, is they very easily beat expectations last year, and now that they have done what they did last year, though, you wonder, are they going to be technically more successful this year? And if they aren't, does it really mean anything? Because, again, I definitely think they overperformed last year. So if they even do what they did last year this year, they're still, to me, ahead of schedule. This is a team that still hasn't really fully turned the roster over yet. They have a bunch of new guys, and especially the receiver room, and I think that their draft is going to go very well for them. I really like Deontay Banks. I love John Michael Schmitz. Like, those guys I think are going to make an impact. But if they are a 9-win, maybe 10-win team this year after last year, is that really a disappointment? Because I think some people are going to think that. I really do. I think that they're going to be mistaken if that's the case. But I wonder, does this team have any higher of a ceiling than what they just did last year, even though they did what they did last year? Like, that's, I think, the question with this team. What do you think, Tony?
I think the ceiling is a little bit higher. When we get to record predictions, you'll see that I don't think it is much higher.
Right. But it's
like you said, they didn't really overhaul the parts of the roster that were really lacking. Now they can get development out of a lot of young guys that will provide a big boost. But I think the reason that they have potential to take another leap is that Daniel Jones is better than we're giving him credit for. He's probably not worth the contract today.
No,
but the front office that these guys came from, the coaching staff that these guys came from, is you pay guys early before they break out. You get them under market value, and it's a risk you incur, but it's a risk that has paid off a bunch for the Bills. And I think Brian Daboll believes in Daniel Jones, which tells me that I should probably believe in Daniel Jones.
Yeah, at least give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah,
we saw flashes of the passing last year. We saw him immediately limit the turnovers, which, like, the fact that changed on a dime shows me that he can improve.
Danny,
I hate myself for that.
Sorry,
folks. But
he's changing
think
all the
that
dimes.
There is more. There's more meat on the bone in the passing game specifically, and I think we're going to see a better passing Daniel Jones, and we're going to start to think, oh wow, they could actually be building something real. I don't think it translates to wins immediately. Still, right. I still think they're behind the other two teams in the division, but I think that the upside case is that Daniel Jones still has room to grow as a passer, and the team believes that he will.
Yes. So I think one of the things we have to talk about is Daniel Jones, right? Because that's kind of I think the tipping point for the ceiling of this team really falls on what he's capable of doing within Dable's offense. Because we obviously know what guys of Josh Allen's stature can do in his offense, but we're not dealing with Josh Allen, obviously. We're dealing with a guy who I do think, and the thing with Daniel Jones for me always, like even getting drafted, he has the physical tools both as an athlete and as a thrower of the football. He is not lacking in those areas, especially not enough to limit your offense. It's everything else about playing quarterback that has been a problem for him, between decision-making, between his accuracy at times being spotty, his obliviousness, this is the best way to describe it, his complete lack of regard for his safety and everyone else's safety on the team. He just kind of is out there playing ball. And when it works, it's awesome. When it doesn't, it's ugly as all hell. And a lot of that did change last year. And I think that's the thing that Dable was able to do for him that other coaches haven't, is try to rein in some of that just goofiness. He's a goofy looking guy, he's a goofy runner. Like everything about Daniel Jones is goofy, but he made it work last year. And I think if he can continue to build upon that, he has the physical tools to be a really good passer of the football and to be a really good running threat. I mean, I forget how many he had way too many rushing yards last year for a guy that is as goofy as him, by the way. I forget exactly what his rushing total was, but I think it was like in the 600-700s, if I'm not mistaken, if not higher. I forget what it was.
Up right now
because I know it was an insane amount. Like I know he's a good athlete, but especially straight line speed. But like if they can continue to tap into that and allow him to make plays in that regard too, like this offense has a pretty high
708.
708. That's what I thought. Like they have a high floor offensively. Right? Between Barkley being back, which unfortunately didn't get the deal he wanted, but like he's back, so that's really important for them. I think the limiting factor, similar to Washington on this team, is what does the offensive line look like? You have an unbelievable tackle in Andrew Thomas, right? You have a very, very talented tackle in first-round pick Evan Neal from last year. He was rough, to say the least, though. You hope that you see a lot of the same development that Andrew Thomas had, and you coming out of Georgia after his first year was pretty rough too. John Michael Schmitz, I think he's going to be immediately a good starter at center. I really do. I think he's a plug and play. Like he can go ahead and give you everything you need as a pass blocker and run blocker day one. Lewinsky has played well at guard in the past. Was a disappointment last year, but I think he's at least a starting caliber player. And then Ben Bredesen is, I don't know.
Hey, if you're stocking four guys, that's respectable.
I really think they have three. You can sort of count on three, depending on how you feel about Lewinsky being a little bit better than last year, because you don't know what you're going to get from Evan Neal. You hope that he shows enough, progression to be a good player in year two, but there's no guarantee of that. Andrew Thomas is the linchpin of this line, right? Like if he were to get hurt, especially, forget about it. Like Daniel Jones could be is great in the pocket as he wants to be if he can get to that point, but he's going to get killed. Like I think that's definitely one of the tipping points of this team is how good the offensive line can be. And the receiver group is deep as hell, but there's only like a couple guys who I'm like, yeah, it's fun. It's an interesting unit. Like they go deep as hell. Like I said, like Jalen Hyatt is probably going to be the sixth receiver if Robinson's healthy.
I think
like to start the season. But my point being is like he's legitimately a specialist, right? Like he's going to be a specialist for them as that deep threat. Everyone else is either like a slot receiver or Isaiah Hodgins. It's a little bit of a weird fit for me, like the whole receiving core. Darius Slayton.
Did you say slot receiver or Isaiah Hodgins as though Isaiah Hodgins has ever taken a snap outside in his life?
That's fair. Yeah, but I mean, for me, like Darius Slayton, I like too. I hope that he can be the actual true deep threat. Like, because
their top three right now is Hodgins, Slayton, and Paris Campbell.
Right. So, like, is Paris going to be the other outside receiver? I don't.
But they've also got like Sterling Shepard. They signed Cole Beasley. We don't know. Wandale Robinson was drafted early last year.
That's kind of my point.
So yeah, that's the issue is how many receivers are they going to take into this? How many receivers are they going to take in? Because it seems at this point that Hodgins, Slayton, and Campbell are slotted to stay. Hyatt is almost absolutely staying because they drafted him in the second round. Yeah. Robinson is staying because he's just hurt right now. Shepard is doing okay. He's still on a very limited snap basis because of his injuries. He hasn't played football the past 2 years.
Not much, at least.
And then you've got a weird mix of Cole Beasley, Jamison Crowner, Colin Johnson, David Sills V, Jaden Mickens, and Khalil Pimpleton. So who's going to
get Bryce Ford Wheaton?
Is he?
Wait, guys, they have 7 rosterable wide receivers. They're going to roster 7 wide receivers.
Yeah, they should.
And I guess it's just the point that they have 7 roster wide receivers, but nobody. It's just I guess nobody is just oh yes.
Nobody's good.
They have insane depth. Is my point. They're not going to have the problem last year where they have 3 guys who can play football in the receiving group. That shouldn't be the case because they'd have to have all of them get injured to get to that point. But I do think it limits the upside, obviously, of this team a little bit with not having weapons outside of Darren Waller, who, again, if he can play, I want to see him play 10 games before I worry about him playing 16 or 17. So that's a whole other conversation. But you do have Bellinger there too, who I did like as a 4th round pick for them last year, right? It's just there's a lot of depth on this team offensively, but all of it is depth and not stars outside of Barkley. Right? Barkley is the shining light, the star, the apple of the Big Apple's eye. Trying to be good with Mars there. Again, I think that this team is really high floor, which is great if you're trying to stay competitive. But at some point, they're going to have to find some star talent outside of Barkley, right? They're going
wait. Barkley is 3rd on their roster in terms of best players.
I'm talking about
Dexter Lawrence.
I'm talking about.
Okay. So he's second. He's second on their offense. Andrew Thomas is way.
Yeah, Andrew Thomas is awesome. He's great, but
infinitely better player.
He's awesome. But,
and not just positional value. He's better at his position than Saquon is at his.
Yeah, he is for sure.
I don't know.
I think you're underselling Andrew Thomas if you feel that way, Zach. It's nothing against Saquon Barkley.
I don't know.
Andrew Thomas is second behind Trent Williams, and it ain't close.
I could have agreed.
It is close. Sorry,
I could have agreed with you last year because
there's a lot of good running backs, Zach. There's a lot of good running backs.
Saquon
isn't a lot of good left.
He wasn't even the best running back last year. Josh Jacobs. Come on.
He was one of
Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry.
He was one of the most valuable running backs last year, but I don't know if he was necessarily individually the best. Let me put it that way. I think that's kind of I understand where Zach's coming from because this offense went as Barkley went, especially for them. But still, it's Andrew Thomas is ridiculous. But let's move on to the defense a little bit here because this is where, like you said, there is a star talent on this defense and one that I think could be a star talent. We'll talk about him too. Dexter Lawrence, man. I saw someone I think it was Brandon Thorne actually. He said about when Dexter Lawrence plays a average or worse center, they literally cannot do anything about him. It's literally they physically just lose every rep. It's impossible. And I think it's really funny because he said, at least in that tweet too, I'd have to try to pull it up and say exactly, but I think he said until week 14, he's not projected to play a center that was in the top 16 of his center rankings, which if you know Brandon Thorne, awesome offensive line guy,
trust his rankings.
Yeah. Trust what he has to say. Yes. Trust what he has to say. Lawrence is going to have, if that's, especially if he's right about that, right? And that holds true. Lawrence is going to have a monster season, monster, freak of nature season, especially for a guy who's listed as a nose tackle, and he is right. He size wise, he is.
That's the crazy thing.
But he's not. He is not a if you look up a nose tackle and he looks like one, does not play like one.
But that's because they run it. But is that because they run a 3-4?
No, it's because he's a freak.
I'm saying is he labeled a nose tackle because they run a 3-4?
He's playing the nose. No, he actually plays the nose. He does everything that's asked of him. He just is also an elite pass rusher from the nose, which doesn't happen.
It just that doesn't exist usually, right?
So what Tampa is hoping Kalijah Kancey is?
Except Clutch
No.
Kids, he's not nose
Oh,
tackle.
wait, no. Oh, no. My bad. But what I predicted Mozzie Smith was going to be. My bad. That's what I meant to say.
That's what Dallas hopes
yeah,
he
actually,
is.
yeah,
Yes,
that's
what, exactly what they hope he is.
There we go.
But yeah, Lawrence.
Wrong call out.
Lawrence makes this front, like Leonard Williams is still a good player, right? Don't get me wrong.
Still a great player.
He's a very good player, but he makes this front go. Like Lawrence's ability to be a nose tackle, traditional nose tackle, and not lose any pass rushing upside at all, and actually having way more pass rush upside when he's on the field, is just not fair. It's literally a cheat code defensively for the front. It's kind of funny to think about it because whenever Javon Hargrave played for the Steelers, who was technically the nose tackle, it was really weird because I viewed him as a 3-tech playing nose tackle, right? Like that's kind of, if you want the pass rush upside, that's what you kind of have to do is play a guy who's not really a nose, but is fine enough at it, but he can stay on the field and pass rush, downs where normally you'd have a run defender in there. Lawrence just is like, oh, I'm just also a really good pass rusher, and by the way, you can't run on me because I'm 340 pounds or whatever he weighs. It's just not. It doesn't make sense, right? Like him coming out of the draft, I was really excited about a guy like him because of the athleticism. Him in the draft.
Like, I was so wrong.
I like the athleticism at that size, and I like the fact that he had shown at least some pass rushing upside. But I still viewed him as a nose tackle, or like a guy who you bring in because you want to stuff the middle of the field. And then he just was like, "Oh yeah, all that athleticism checks out. It works. It translates." I'm like, Jesus Christ. It just doesn't, like, you just don't find guys like this. Like Vita Vea is supposed to be like the generational nose tackle, and he's great. He does not have what Lawrence has. He doesn't.
Not even
like
close.
He is the only guy where it's like, okay, he still has pocket pushing ability at nose tackle. Everyone else who plays true nose tackle in the NFL cannot touch Lawrence at this point. Like it's not even close. You have to start comparing him to 3-techs. You have to. Like it's the only way you can compare him fairly to other defensive linemen. So
if I'm building a roster from scratch, he's my third defensive tackle off.
Yeah, not third defensive tackle.
And honestly, if we're going for longevity, I like
right, because then you have to factor.
He might be DT1.
Like that.
He might
exactly. But the rest of this defense, Kayvon Thibodeau is the other guy I'm looking at here. If he can be a legit edge one, whether it's this year or into the future, it changes the numbers defensively for them because right now you have Lawrence as the focal point of offensive lines, right? Like he has to be the one that they key in on. Because if you don't, again, if he faces an average center, they literally can't do anything about it. They just lose, basically. So they have to double team him anyway. But even if if you have a guy like Thibodeau who doesn't get double teamed, then he has to win his one-on-ones. And he did show a lot as a rookie whenever he was playing. Like I remember the Washington game especially was really good for him. The first one he played against them, at least. But he has to show it consistently because if they don't have anyone else at edge other than Azeez Ojulari, who I think he is a good player, but he is a lighter player. He's a little bit more limited, I think, because of that. Thibodeau is a full-size edge player that has the athleticism to win around the edge consistently. Those two have to show up defensively for them, or the front seven outside of Lawrence and obviously Leonard Williams does get a little bit dicey for me. I think that their pass rush could suffer if those two don't play most of the games and play well in those games. But what do you guys think about the defense overall?
It's all defensive line for me. And the cool thing about having Wink Martindale as your defensive coordinator is that your coverage players are out on an island, which isn't great. And their coverage players aren't great. So I last year, I think we saw the chaos of Wink Martindale work, right?
Yes.
Like their roster wasn't talented enough on the defensive side, so they threw the kitchen sink at teams, and it worked.
Exactly. Yeah.
The thing with throwing the kitchen sink at teams is that you can also get beat, and when you get beat, it's ugly. Yeah. And so I think that that's a risk. We might see some regression towards them, getting cooked a little bit more often. They did add Bobby Okereke in free agency, and I think he's an excellent linebacker.
Yes, he was a very good pickup for them because they have struggled at middle linebacker for a long time.
Yeah, that's a definite need, and I'm really glad that I was upset that the Bills didn't sign him to replace Tremaine Edmonds, so I held the guy in high regard. But and then Deonte Banks added at corner. I do think that he can be special. I know corners usually don't start out great.
He's a perfect
early on.
Fit though for this game. But just the get up in your face, bump and run. Like he is perfect for what they want to do, and I think that's a really big part of why he was drafted in the first round,
Yes.
opposed to going for another position or something like that, because right now they just don't have many guys who physically can do that, right? Like that's kind of the key thing with him is the physical talent allows him to do that in Wink Martindale's scheme. So
yeah, so overall I think the defense probably is better down to down, but might
yes.
be a little bit. I don't know. Defense is variable. It might still end up
Yes.
as worse defense, but I do think it's better on paper at least going into this season.
They have a higher ceiling defensively, I think. Like I think it's not just as simple as, oh, if we just create chaos, we'll have 7 or 8 games of really excellent defense. Like they have more potential to routinely give teams trouble, but you're asking a lot of players who are still pretty inexperienced to be the reason why that happens. So there's going to be some variance there. Like there's going to be weeks Deontay Banks, like I already know, there's going to be weeks where he is just locked down. He keeps guys from getting off the line, and the pass rush gets home, and he does great. And there's times where when the ball's in the air and he doesn't have the best ball skills, he's going to get beat down the field probably. Like that's just what's going to happen. But you can kind of say that about any team that's going to run a scheme like this. So I think that they're just hoping that they get a little bit better play out of the secondary, especially. And I will say, I wish that they could have kept Julian Love instead of trying to play Jason Pinnock as strong safety. I would have liked them to be able to keep him. But at the same time, again, like it's going to be a high variance defense regardless. So let's just kind of see what they got. Any other major notes you guys want to go over with the roster with any of the guys on the team, or we kind of covered everything?
No, yeah, I think
good, yeah.
I think we covered the roster, and then we've talked about the coaching, but we all know the coaching is
Brian Daboll. He's the guy.
That's why Giants fans should feel good. Is the coaching?
Yeah, he's already a top 10 head coach. Like he just I think that especially offensive minded coaches that can come in and do what he's done with the culture and with getting them to a floor. Which again, like I thought this team was going to win 6 or 7 games at most last year, and not because I didn't like Brian Daboll. It's just they just weren't very talented. Like the roster just wasn't there yet, and for them to do what they did last year gives them a lot of grace. I think coming into this year, especially. But let's get into record predictions here. Let's start with Tony here again. What do you think for the Giants?
So like I said earlier, I do think this is going to be a better team than it was last year. I don't know if that translates to results, unfortunately, for them. They do play the AFC East, which is tough. They have a tough schedule overall.
For a third place team, especially,
for a third place team, it's tough. So I think their ceiling is 10 wins. I think they went 9-7-1 last year. If I'm not mistaken.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so them and the Commanders tied.
Yeah.
So I do think that their ceiling's still right around there. I think that's playoffs in the NFC. I think they're a playoff team. I think their floor is 8 wins. I do think that they have a very narrow. I feel like I know this team, right?
Yes.
Like I do acknowledge that Daniel Jones passing ceiling. I don't think it gets them an extra couple wins though. I just between 8 and 10 wins, I'm going to put them at 9-8 as my nice fence sitting prediction.
What do you think, Zach?
I have them just slightly below the Commanders, just because I think like what you were saying earlier, like they exceeded expectations in the fact that they won a lot more games than we thought, and them winning 10 games this year would then be making more progress and in the linear fashion. But just even though it's not oh my gosh, they were 9-7-1 last year, it's only one more game, but no, they shouldn't have been 9-7-1 last year. But I put them at 8-9, 9-8, 8-9. Them and the Commanders are unless something really, really clicks for both teams, they're just with what this division is, they're likely to be the bottom 2. Just because there's just so much more talent as you go up.
Yeah, and I think again, it limits the ceiling for them because again, I think that their roster is very deep now, and I think it's good enough at really every position to be competitive with most teams. But you have to question the upside. Is Daniel Jones going to get significantly better than he was last year? He probably doesn't have to be for this to be a playoff team, but if he can be, that's great. I still think, like you said, something 10 wins, maybe 11 if they win a couple upsets over some teams that are clearly more talented than them. But I do see them similar as a really high floor team. Like I said, maybe I'll set the floor at 7 just because I don't like to factor in injuries. But if something happens to Saquon Barkley, for example. He's one of the few running backs where his injury might derail an offense entirely. But I will say that I expect them to be at least as good of a team as they were last year, and I think that this time they would be fair for them to be that good, opposed to be surprising. So, but let's move on to the top 2, the big daddies of the division, if you will say. Cowboys up next. I want to love this Cowboys team. I want to. And a lot of it comes down to one person in particular. Okay.
Oh wow, we see this the exact
Yes.
same. I was gonna
Tony
say
and
like I
I-
am so
Tony
pissed that
and,
I can't go to the extremes I want to with when talking about this team just because of one guy.
I think Tony and I are on the same page. I'm not saying that Kellen Moore was the greatest offensive coordinator in NFL history or anything like that, right? But going from Kellen Moore to the coaching of Mike McCarthy offensively, I really truly believe that even if it doesn't ultimately keep them from winning 11, 12 games again and getting into the playoffs and whatever else, it's such a deflating feeling as someone who, again, I don't hate the Cowboys. A lot of Steelers fans hate the Cowboys. A lot of fans hate the Cowboys in general. I just don't usually hate teams unless they really truly give me a reason to, like themselves. Like if outside hype and like everything else does it, whatever, I don't really give a shit about that. I want to like this Cowboys team. I like a lot of the players in this Cowboys team. I love Tony Pollard. I have grown to like Dak Prescott more through the years. I still I think I'm closer to like sort of not liking him as much as consensus, but also still closer to consensus than I used to be on him. I really like the players on this team. I look at Mike McCarthy and I'm like, why are you here? What have you done outside of winning one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback? What have you done to still be here?
The problem is that Jerry Jones has asked, "What have you done?" And the answer is really good things. He has not asked, "What are you going to do?" And the answer is going to be really bad things.
It's just that, like, you look at this roster: Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks at receiver. Really, really awesome, especially healthy top three. Right.
Well, now, okay. Well, you say healthy because
I know
Michael Gallup is not healthy right now.
Gallup,
he was not healthy last year. He is healthy now.
He's healthy now. Yeah. Michael
Unless
Gallup,
there's been an injury that I
haven't heard anything about.
Oh, I have not had. I just didn't hear him being back fully.
No,
yet.
He should be good. Brandon Cooks, again, we know his head could cave in at any second, but he'll probably hopefully be all right. Especially because he's not going to be as high volume as he usually has been in the past, I imagine. The offensive line, I'm quietly optimistic about. I think Tyron Smith, if he can just be on the field, is still a good enough player. I liked what they got from Tyler Smith last year. Biotish is probably the weak link, realistically, outside of health concerns, but he's still at least an average center. Zach Martin got his money. Good for them. They should do that. That was smart. And then Terrence Hill is really good tackle for them last year.
He's really good.
Really good. So, like, offensive line is solid. Tony Pollard is really the only guy that I think, well, Deuce Vaughn, we know we love Deuce Vaughn, I feel like, just because you have to. But, like, outside of him and Vaughn, like, the running back group doesn't really inspire a whole lot, but if Pollard's healthy, it doesn't really matter that much. I think he's ready for a full workload. The defense, the pass rush, like, everything, the secondary is a little, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, because, like, especially if Stephon Gilmore suddenly hits a wall at whatever age he is now, corner two might get real ugly real fast for them. But beside the point, this roster is clearly like full-on contenders level talent-wise. Again, is McCarthy going to get in the way? And I really just think he will. Like, that's just kind of my hang up with this team. And I don't know if it's going to change what I think they'll do in the regular season, like I said, but I just cannot imagine a scenario in my head where this team competes for a Super Bowl with Mike McCarthy calling the offense and being the head coach.
Their offense, just their personnel on the entire roster, it's a damn Ferrari.
It's good. It's good as
and hell. Mike McCarthy wants to drive an old beat up rusty pickup truck, and he's going to drive his it's terrible metaphor, but they have a really good roster, and he's a plain vanilla, going to lose you expected points throughout the course of the game. He's going to make the conservative, non-risk taking. He's going to satisfy your grandpa, and your grandpa's going to think that he's a damn good game manager.
It's Joe Philbin.
The year is 2023, and grandpa needs to study football better. because Mike McCarthy is not a good coach. He's going to run an archaic offense. He's going to take away the pace of the offense. He's going to run the ball more with less creativity behind it, with less intent behind it. He is going to do everything in his power to take away what made this offense awesome. And yeah, Dak will probably have less turnovers because they're going to be pushing the ball downfield less, but that is a problem, not a solution. The Dak doesn't throw picks. The last couple of years, the last year specifically was an anomaly. Like that hasn't been his career norm, but it came pushing the ball down the field. They were still a great offense. If you take away the pushing the ball down the field, yeah, the interceptions are going to go away, but you're not going to score points at the end of those drives. And that's what Mike McCarthy's dream is just not throwing interceptions, but also not scoring points on drives.
It's just so hard, and I'll let you talk here in a second, Zach, but I want to talk about with Dak Prescott, right? He's a guy for me, right, where like people talk about the interceptions with him, especially the last 2 years. I understand, like, there were some ugly moments this past year, but, like, he did have some injury stuff that happened, obviously, earlier in the year. He's had that throughout his career, really, at this point. His ability to push the ball down the field and willingness to is what made this offense so good. Like that, and you talk about Tony, like for a player to do that, it's way more important to me for a player to be aggressive than it is for them to not throw picks. Because you can, and picks are going to happen in the NFL regardless for a lot of guys, right? I'd rather see a guy go out there and just try to sling the ball around and make plays more so than I'd rather him take the check down on 3rd and 10. Looking at you, or on 4th down, looking at you, Kirk, last year. Because those two get compared a lot in NFL circles, and I think that it's because people view them in similar lights, like talent-wise, and I get that. Dak is just a more overall aggressive player than Kirk is, and I think that gives him a slight edge. I'm not worried about the interceptions, right? Like a lot of people
play each other for quite a bit.
Well, when
they were in the division,
yeah. But my whole thing with him is like I don't have any problem with Dak, or I don't view him lower than maybe consensus by a little bit because of anything to do with his turnovers or anything like that. Because it's going to happen. I'm not super highly focused on turnovers and stuff like that. I just think that for him, and this is going to be made worse by McCarthy, is he doesn't have that innate playmaking ability on 3rd down, gotta have it downs. He doesn't have that. It's hard to like conceptualize it or talk about it in like a analytical sense or a true like film sense, but he doesn't have that ability to just take over the game on 3rd downs like the top quarterbacks do. And I don't think he's ever going to have that. He doesn't have the pocket presence at times as well with that. He doesn't manipulate the pocket as well as I'd like him to. But he's still firmly in that like top 10 quarterback conversation for everyone, especially like I still am at that point with him. But McCarthy's going to limit him. And that's what's going to hurt so much. Is like he's a guy that I think has the tools to do that stuff that I talked about that he hasn't really done throughout his career. But he's never going to do that, especially if McCarthy is now going to be taking over for him. Like he's just going to make him a more conservative version of himself. And like, yeah, his numbers might look overall similar production-wise, and he might throw less picks. But this offense is not going to be as good. It just isn't. And it doesn't matter how good the talent is. Like he's literally a prohibiting factor on their success just being the guy calling plays. So, but what do you want to add, Zach, there?
The only thing I would really add is the top 3 are great. I'm not a fan of their depth at wide receiver. I think it's very top heavy. Because
most teams are like that.
Your 4th guy's Jalen Tolbert. We've been talking about this entire division, and we've been able to name much better guys for number 4 than Jalen.
I don't hate Tolbert. I think he was a decent draft prospect, but he just hasn't done a whole lot yet.
Didn't the team immediately sour on him too? Like he was Dak requested to draft him. He was an older prospect out of like South Alabama or something.
I think it was it? It wasn't. Yeah, I think it was South Alabama actually. Yeah,
and something like that. I don't know. That's not sounding right anymore. The more I think about it, but either way, like I think by the end of training camp, we heard like, oh yeah, he's not even working in with the 2s. He's working in with the 3. Like I think it was very quick and early on that they were like, yeah, we don't like him that much.
Yeah, and then like their number 5 is Kavontae Turpin, which like cool or XFL, but like.
He's a return specialist. Simi Fehoko is a big body guy.
Elite return specialist.
So like that's my biggest concern for them is that like the depth behind like what if you do have Michael Gallup get hurt again? What if something happens to Brandon Cooks or CeeDee Lamb? Like you don't have much behind them.
Yeah, I think their tight end room is really fun, and they'd probably pivot to try to run more through that. Because I do think that they have like 4 guys that are reasonable.
Jake Ferguson, Peyton Hendershot, Luke Schoonmaker, and Sean McKeon.
No, it was 3 guys. The first 3 you named. Sean McKeon. Yeah. I don't acknowledge him as a NFL player.
Yeah, we're good. I do like Ferguson. I really liked the pick for them because I knew Schultz was not going to get a contract, and he's basically. I think he's Dalton Schultz, basically. Like I think that's what he's going to be, roughly. So, and Schoonmaker, I was like, whatever. I don't.
That's a future pick. That's we want to make sure we have 2 viable tight ends in the next few years. Fine.
And like Hendershot's a good enough third tight end, especially like I think he's out of Indiana or whatever. Like their overall skill. Again, this roster is not the problem at all. Like that's not why I'm a little lower on this team than I probably should be if you're looking at it objectively. It's again Mike McCarthy effect, man. Like I just feel like the ship should have sailed with some of the playoff losses last 2 years. Like that 49ers game was really hard to watch. Both of them really like it's just like like I really think the last play of McCarthy's tenure should have been the freaking Zeke center thing. Like it had to be. Like I don't care if he had anything to do with it or not. Like that's just you just lose your job when that happens. Like to me, it's like they can't even lose playoff games normal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
they run out of
they run out of time and then they put Zeke at center. Like why? We just lose normal. If you lose normal, I'll leave you alone. But now I have to think about Zeke at center forever. Like I'm going to replay that play all the time because it still makes me laugh every time I see it. I think that's kind of the book on this team, guys. Right? Like is the talent's there. Mozzie Smith I was a little lower on than for like where they took him, but I just acknowledge the fact that I don't know if he can rush the passer because they played him so weird. I just have no idea if he can. Like
I don't think Dan Quinn is going to ask him to. I think he's going to tell him, "Hey, my run defense was a problem last year. Can you just take care of that and we'll do the rest?"
I just still like I understand nose tackles becoming more and more important, and especially in certain schemes. I just still want if I'm going to draft a defensive lineman in the first round, I want them to have pass rush upside. And it's not even that he doesn't necessarily. I just don't know because he played him so weird at Michigan. Like he played in like that weird stance where he like couldn't actually like get off the ball in the way that a pass rusher needs to. But it's fine. Michael Parsons obviously and DeMarcus Lawrence are kind of like as far as how far this defense can go, because Diggs obviously he played more of like actual cornerback last year, not pick merchant, which was nice to see. But those two are going to take this defense as far as it goes, right? If Parsons can now that he's basically, I guess he's just going to play full time edge now, right? Like they're kind of done with the hybrid thing.
Yeah,
right?
they quit the linebacker
like
stuff.
How good can he be past? Like he's already shown to be unbelievable, right? Can he be even better as a full time edge? Like. I feel like I don't know how he's going to be a whole lot better than he's been, but if he can be, then awesome. Lawrence should still be a really good player as well. He's been. That's really what I look because like Van Der Esch is fine. Damone Clark I liked as a prospect out of LSU. We'll see if he can stay healthy. The secondary with Diggs is good. Obviously, the safeties are fine. Stephon Gilmore is the guy that like I'm looking at. If he plays like Stephon Gilmore still, the secondary could be really, really good with that pass rush. But if he suddenly hits a wall, because I think he's 34 now? Is he 33, 34? It's one of those two, I think. Like I can't remember if it's 33 or 34. But he's 30. I thought he was 30. He's 32 right now. He'll be 30. He'll be 33 in the first like 2 weeks of the season. But if he can still play as a starting caliber player, they're in good shape for the most part of the secondary. But one injury in the secondary, though, because right now I think Jordan Lewis is on the PUP.
I didn't realize Lewis was on the PUP because I was looking at the list of players and I was like, I like the depth at corner too. But
he's on the PUP right now. I don't know if how soon he'll be off. Deron Bland, fine.
I like Deron Bland a lot.
He's
gonna play the slot, right?
Right now Lewis is considered the starting nickelback if he's healthy. So it'd be Lewis, Gilmore, and Diggs.
Yeah, and then they did draft Marvion Overshawn, who like technically was kind of that overhang nickel type.
Yes, who also may have torn his ACL apparently.
Never mind. I'll take.
Yeah, I heard.
He's
that
not going to contribute. Shit.
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't.
Sorry to hear that. I enjoyed the player.
So. Me too. Actually, he was one of the guys I wanted the Steelers to target possibly as a linebacker, but again, I don't think this is a question about the roster at all, guys. I think it's just a question about is Mike McCarthy going to limit them a ton. But let's just so we can have time for the Eagles here. Let's do a record prediction for them. What do you think? Let's start with Zach this time. What do you think for their overall record here?
Well, I mean, it's like we said, it's tough because like these two teams are undoubtedly in the top of the NFC East. I can't imagine them being a single-digit win team, but I can't imagine them going above much more than 10 or 11 with some of the complications of coaching and all of that. So like 11-6 at the very best.
Okay, what do you think, Tony?
I'm a little bit higher on them, and so I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this. So before if Kellen Moore was still the offensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys and personnel was all the same, everything else was the same, I think I would be actually comfortable picking them above the Eagles. I think regular season wise, I think they're going to be really, really damn good team. And even with Mike McCarthy, I think they have a ceiling of 13 wins. Like, I hate Mike McCarthy. I think he's a detriment to the team. I will acknowledge that he has won a Super Bowl before. He has an incredible defensive coordinator. If the offense just kind of carries along, like good things can still happen here. I don't want to put it out there that I think it's terrible. I do think their floor is like 10 wins. They've gone 12-5 the last 2 years. I think they're going 12-5. But yeah, I just wanted to get that in there, that if Kellen Moore were still with this team, I think they might be my Super Bowl pick. I think they're going to have the best defense in the league. I think they're going to have the most sacks in the league. I think they're going to be a really, really, really good regular season team. And then I think the Mike McCarthy is really going to show up when the playoffs hit. But so yeah, we'll say 12-5. I was gonna put out my like 14 win ceiling if Kellen Moore was still there, but I'll put it at 13. Knock it down a little bit.
Yeah, I just think, again, McCarthy's a limiting factor for this team. I think it definitely puts a ceiling on how good they could theoretically be. I'm not going to pick a McCarthy-led team, especially offensively-led team, to win Super Bowl or anything like that. Like you said, Tony, like I just can't do that. I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender until he's gone. But they're still going to be a good regular season team. I think that they are probably 11-6, 12-5, most likely. I think there's a scenario where they lose more than 10 games, win less than 10 games, but mostly injury-related or like if like the secondary implodes because Gilmore's bad, Diggs is bad for some reason. Like, but it's still more likely that this is at least a double-digit win team, more likely closer to that 12-win ceiling there. Now, the big dogs, right? The team that just went to the Super Bowl and almost pulled off the upset over the Chiefs if it weren't for some questionable coaching, probably from the guy who's currently the Cardinals head coach. At least that's what I keep hearing from everybody. I think also they're just better, but whatever. Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah. So they give Jalen Hurts the bag, right? Which we knew was going to happen. And I will say, and I said it before the season last year, I was certainly not a Jalen Hurts truther by any means. I felt like he was going to be better because he gets better every year, but I didn't think it would be to this extent. And it's not just the offensive talent that they had. It's not just the scheme. He legitimately played so much better as a player than he had shown prior to this. However, I think part of the reason, at least for me, Tony, I don't know if it's part of the reason for you, I understand why a Kellen Moore-led offensive Cowboys team could have jumped them in terms of what you think about these teams. Because as much as Jalen Hurts played great last year, you have to wonder – if that is the ceiling of it, that's great. Was that the ceiling, though, and will he play at that level again? And I think it's fair to ask because, again, you're losing Shayne Steichen. Now, they still have the same head coach in place, obviously, so, like, you're not worried about that. So, I'm like, you're worried about things that you just don't know at this point if they can maintain this level of play. A.J. Brown, awesome. Devontae, like, all the offensive weapons are still there. The offensive line is still in place for the most part. Like, you do lose Ciamalo, thanks, by the way, Eagles, but they have a plan in place for that. Like, I'm not really worried about a ton of regression by any means, but you have to wonder, was that kind of offensively the absolute peak that this team is capable of? And if they only take a step or two down, it doesn't mean that they're not going to still have a chance to win this division, of course, and still go far in the playoffs. But are they going to be able to maintain that level of play for more than a season? I think it's fair to ask at this point still. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I don't. I think the concerns with this team aren't the roster. It's not can they win the division. It's not can they make the playoffs. It's can they go win the Super Bowl because they were just there last year, and only lost by 3 points. So my thoughts on the roster are just that last year everything kind of went perfectly for them. Exactly. I know Jalen Hurts got banged up towards the end of the year, but outside of that, they were an extremely healthy team. I think the entire offensive line stayed healthy the entire season. The defensive line was very healthy. They had a lot of good bodies there. The secondary, they just the weapons, they were healthy. They were extremely healthy, and healthy teams win they win a lot of games. They go to the playoff, but when you lose your star power, we don't know. And you assume some injuries will happen. No team is perfectly healthy like the Eagles were last year. That doesn't last for multiple straight years. It's very, very rare. So they have one of the deepest rosters in the league, which helps mitigate that. But you lose the star power if talent goes down. I think the safeties could be a question mark, but not enough for me to actually care about them. I really just think it is that everything went right. They were healthy. They were really strong on the turnover battle. They super efficient in the red zone and goal line situations. Now, a lot of that I think is sticky, right? A lot of that I think they helped themselves get to those areas, but some luck gets factored in there, and it's uncomfortable to predict that to just happen again as it did. Yeah. So I think that they're going to be a really, really good team. I think that they're not going to be as healthy. I think that they lost their offensive coordinator, who was really, really good, and now they have a first-time offensive coordinator calling plays, and that's a question mark. And I think their defensive coordinator leaving wasn't the end of the world, because I don't know how much he was helping there, but I don't think Sean Desai is an incredible replacement. That there's not a ton of guys out there that if they had signed Fangio, I would have been yep, they're winning the Super Bowl this time. But it's Sean Desai, so I have questions. So my questions with the Eagles are, I think that they are a top 3 team in the league, and I think that they have every chance in the world to win the Super Bowl this year. How much of last year's uncontrollables duplicate? How much do they get the ball to bounce their way this year? Because that's really the only thing. Once you're talking about the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Eagles, teams like this, it's not a question of hey, did they get way worse? It's no, but did everything that went well last year, does that fall in their way again this year? And so that's the questions with the Eagles.
Again, I think it's about, and I want to get your thoughts here, Zach, too, but I think it's about how repeatable it is. Like you said, Tony, they were so healthy, their offense was clicking all year for the most part, and I do believe in Jalen Hurts. I don't want to say that he's not going to play at that level ever again, but he played at a level that, if he played the whole year and Mahomes didn't exist, he's an MVP. He's probably the MVP front runner, right? His ability as a runner, his effectiveness there, specifically in short yard situations. We don't even have to talk about the 92% club, the sneaks. Shout out, Kelsey brothers, by the way, 92%ers. But you get the point. So much of what happened last year is partially going to be luck, right? Because injury luck is a thing in the NFL. It just is. Teams that are healthy, like you said, they tend to go far. The team that I think of that doesn't really follow that mold is the Packers, the year that they beat the Steelers, where half their team was on IR for some reason. They still managed. That just isn't normal, though, right? Teams that aren't healthy tend not to go super far. So if they have injury questions, now granted they are a very deep team, so they could probably survive some without it being a huge issue, but
especially on defense.
If Hurts were to go down, we know Marcus Mariota ain't taking him anywhere. And I think I'd rather have Tanner freaking McKee from Stanford at this point, probably play over him.
We'd rather have him than Ian Book. So
yeah, well, but the point being is it's if a couple injuries happen that didn't happen last year, they go from a 14-3 team to maybe 11-6, 12-5 team that has some questions going in the playoffs.
I still think that's very dependent on position, because like I just said, on defense, the rich got richer on defense there, and they had an incredible draft and offseason. Yeah,
getting Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith is not the league should have stopped that from happening. I'm just going to be honest with you about it.
And Jalen Carter gets hurt. Oh no, Jordan Davis is back out there. Okay, so there's certain positions where they can afford to not necessarily they can afford to lose a guy here and there, but then there are, like you said, Jalen Hurts. like if AJ Brown or Devonta Smith goes down,
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
the
what
one
we're
I
gonna
wanted
turn
to say.
to.
If one of those
Yeah.
a lot of time.
Yeah.
Not
Olamide Zaccheaus.
Quez Watkins is
As
good
much
for,
as I
like,
do
the
like
big
Olamide
plays.
Zaccheaus, he's no Devonta Smith.
Greg
He's
Ward.
as lean, but not Devonta Smith.
Quez Watkins is good for like a 60-yard pass play every 3 weeks, so that's cool. But he's not going to consistently give you stuff. Greg Ward's still out there, and you know that he's still out there playing.
Now, granted, they do have Dallas Goedert, so.
Yeah, but basically the point of this whole thing with them for me is the question is not about how good of a team they are currently. It's will they have the same luck? Will they have the same output offensively with a new offensive coordinator calling plays? Because as Tony knows, losing your offensive coordinator, despite having a lot of the same pieces offensively, can really be a huge issue sometimes. And like as much as I think Josh Allen and the Bills are going to be just fine, Tony. Watching that offense last year sometimes.
This is the weirdest misconception to me. Ken Dorsey, he was better. Like, I think Brian Daboll is objectively a better offensive coordinator than Ken Dorsey. Ken Dorsey last year, that was the best offensive coordinating we have seen in Buffalo with Josh Allen around. He was pulling all the right buttons.
I think the problem is nobody knows how to use Josh Allen.
No, he knew it. So he solved the Josh Allen conundrum until his elbow got injured in week 9. They were the most efficient offense. They were number 1 in EPA per play, number 1 in DVOA, number 1 in success rate,
they were
number 1 in every single metric. They were the perfect model of always pushing it downfield, but taking what the defense gives you, no mistakes. Like, it was perfect offense. Ken Dorsey, until Josh Allen's elbow injury, that was the best play calling we have seen in Buffalo. Now, after the injury, when you have to throw it downfield, that's a problem. But
I'll be honest with you, kind of forgot that Allen hurt his elbow because he didn't stop playing. So I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's like
it's not like another quarterback who gets hurt and can't play.
And Shayne, that wasn't at you. That was there's just a million Bills fans out there that think that Ken Dorsey was this massive step down. And it's like, no, that was actually an upgrade somehow. I don't know if it'll continue to be an upgrade, but somehow last year it was an upgrade.
I forgot about his elbow injury because like he just didn't miss time. I thought he was going to. I remember it happening.
I wanted him to. Yeah,
because like in the regular season, especially, like you're fine.
Take a week off.
Yeah, or 2, whatever.
Throw Matt Barkley in there.
Especially because the game immediately after was the Vikings game, and like if he had just not played that and we just lost and it was fine and
normal, like it was a psychopath game. It was.
Yeah, instead it was like one of the greatest games ever played. It was just craziness the entire way.
Yeah, but in general, like I said, anything you want to add here, Zach, that we haven't already talked about with this team? Or
no, I mean, like I like the Eagles. Unlike a lot of the league, I don't have any animosity towards them.
49ers hate the Eagles.
I'm so happy that I'm a fan base that like doesn't have to hate the Eagles, like because it's just funny the way Eagles fans are, the way the team they're fun.
I mean like who's adjacent.
Exactly. I would say ironically, you have an adjacent fan base to the Eagles' insanity. The Dolphins have their own insanity, but it's not the same. But like it's kind of like getting to enjoy Bills Mafia, but not having to root for them.
I feel like being an Eagles fan should be able to be classified as a mental illness, not because it's a bad thing to be one, but because what it does to you is essentially
no. They've gotten a Super Bowl. They don't get to complain.
No, it's just no. I'm not talking about like being upset. I'm like that. What it physically does to their mental health is
it develops them into being exceptional haters.
It's unbelievable. It's crazy.
Messi has gotten like just standing ovations and cheers every stadium he's gone to for the LMS. They booed the shit out of that man and laughed at him when he put the ball off the post. They have exceptional hater energy. It is so admirable.
That's awesome. That's the American way. If you are not of the team, we are not here to root for you in the moment. But when the game is over, maybe we can show a little bit of respect.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but still the two best things that like has ever come out of Philly story wise to me, like hater wise, is booing Santa Claus, right?
Yes.
When they were doing that,
and then
they had this. Do you remember the hitchhiker like robot thing that Did you hear that story?
They beat the shit out of it.
There was this. They created this robot that's supposed to like hitchhike across the country, and it got to Philly, and then they beat the shit out of it and mugged it. Like they literally like they're like, no, we're not playing this game. We're not following along. We're beating this thing up, and its journey ends here.
Right. Honorable mention goes out to that guy who caught a baby from a burning building and then said, "Yeah, and I caught it." Unlike Nelson Aguilar.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
So the Santa one gets a little worse because it was not just booing Santa Claus. They pelted that poor man with snowballs, and I believe possibly through batteries as well.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Eagles fans are next level. Interesting.
Yeah, there is a courthouse underneath the there is a courthouse underneath the stadium.
Yes. No, but I want a Steelers-Eagles Super Bowl in my lifetime so badly because I want to see Pennsylvania burn to the ground. Because that's what will happen. That's what's going to happen. Anyway, but let's get to record predictions and get out of here because it's been a long show. But let's start with Zach this time again here.
All right, so I had teased in the last show that after talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, that there was one other team that I felt could go undefeated. However, the Eagles would unfortunately have to do practically the impossible and beat Kansas City at home after a bye week in order to go undefeated. I also believe if I look at that schedule again, that is a Monday night game as well. So I 16-1.
Okay.
I can't go against Andy Reid.
Yeah, fair enough. What do you have for them, Tony?
Yeah, so my standard, I think this team can win the Super Bowl, but I'm not going to predict that they can go 17-0. They can ceiling of 14-3. That's what I've been just stamping on everybody.
Yep.
So
that's kind of thing, yeah.
So give it that, and then I think it's a floor of 11-6. I think I was going to say 12-5, but I don't know. I do think that there's just variability. I am going to predict them to go 13-4 again, though. I do think this team is incredible. I think they've net upgraded at running back with Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift in there.
I still like Kenny Gainwell.
I still think that. I love Kenny Gainwell and Boston Scott too. It's just that now you have four just like guys who can just house it. I think they're going to go 13-4. I think they're going to be really good.
Miles Sanders.
So for me, I do think 14-3. I think the same record they had last year, I do think is their ceiling. I think that if everything goes the same as it did last year, obviously, they're going to be in that category as like firmly top 3 team, if not top 2 team, right there with the Chiefs again. Yeah. I do think it's less likely that they can repeat the 14-3 success just because, again, it's just hard to stay healthy. And I know Hurts missed a couple games, so like you could factor that in. Like, what if he doesn't miss those games? Like, it's still like if they're in a position to win 14 games again, they're probably going to sit him the last week anyway. So like, I think 14 wins is still the ceiling. I think that the floor is a little lower than I wish it was, just because again, they are having a whole new linebacking core. Basically, that's something that we didn't really talk about.
A whole new one as of today, even. Right. It was supposed to be Miles Jack, and now it's going to be Zach Cunningham because Miles Jack retired.
Exactly. So like that's a part of it, of course, as well. The secondary is getting older, especially Darius Slay, obviously, and like I think both him and Bradbury are still going to be really good this year. But like at some point, you're starting 30-plus-year-old corners.
Well, that's why you draft Keely Ringo.
Well, he's going to be hopefully a safety at some point instead of a corner for me at least. But that's beside the point. I just think again, like I think 10 wins is the floor. Just because, again, I think this division is really, really tough. It is like none of these teams are bad. It's really possible for them to lose to anybody in the division. They did last year already. Like
they lost to Washington, and I think that was the of all the teams to take to end the winning streak. That was the last one I would have picked.
Exactly. So like I think it's totally possible for them to still obviously still be comfortably in the playoffs, but still be closer to like just above double-digit wins opposed to the 14-3 mark. But that'll do it for us as far as NFC East goes, guys. Next week, we are going to finish off with the AFC East, of course, talk about probably the most interesting division overall, in my opinion, between the Aaron Rodgers situation and, the Bills. Are they finally going to be able to get over the hump? I know Tony's hoping that's going to be the case. Are the Patriots going to do Patriots things? And then the Dolphins, man.
What does year 2 of Mike McDaniel look like?
What is Mike 2? What is year 2?
What is Mike 2? What is Mike 2? Mike 2 check.
What is Mike 2?
Mike 2. But all right, that'll do it for this week. We'll see you guys next week. I promise we'll try to be here this time. We're not going to try to do it by a week. Want to try to get everything done before the preseason's over and everything, so we can talk about real football coming.
Real football, regular season
football. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody.